name is Jessica Ivins. I am moderating today's panel. And just to give you guys a heads up about what we're going to do today is we have so we're going to discuss prototyping. We have some predetermined questions that I gave to the panelists for them to prepare their answers for. So I'll ask the panelists 3 questions, then I'll open it up to you folks for audience Q&A. And we'll wrap up probably shortly before 1 o'clock. So we'll start off with introductions. I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves. I'll kick it off. Again, my name is Jessica Ivins. I'm with Center, the UX Design School in Tennessee. And I just moved here from Philadelphia about a year ago to be a faculty member of Center. And I'm going to talk to you, I guess we'll each go through it and say our names, where we work, and what type of experience we have with prototyping. So for me, I've been in the field for about 10 years. I built a range of prototypes, everything from low fidelity paper prototypes to high fidelity prototypes that are actually connected to customer accounts and in our product environment. I've usability tested lots of prototypes. I started out as a front-end developer and I've been a UX designer for about 7 years. Usability tested paper prototypes to high fidelity prototypes. I've used a variety of tools, but I haven't used any of the more popular tools lately. I've used Acture, good old HTML, and even tools like Pop, which allow you to do low fidelity prototypes on a phone. So that's me in a nutshell. So I'm going to ask each of the panelists to take about 1 minute each and tell us your name, where you work, and what type of experience you have with prototyping.
I'm Isip. I do freelance design and front-end developments. I also work on a product called Taco, which was a Kickstarter project and then turned into kind of more of a side project, but slowly feeding something. So I do like product design. Yeah, I use prototypes a lot, especially with startups. I've worked with startups for the past 8 or so years, originally from Seattle. I was in New York for the last 3 years, and then I moved here about 7 months ago. So we use prototyping for multiple reasons, either testing a business idea, testing functionality, testing components, or even just using it for like internal communication. And I can go into that later. Yeah, that's my show.
Okay, I'm Rina Henderson. I work for CodeScience across the river, we develop apps for the app exchange for Salesforce, focusing on desktop and mobile. So my recent experience prototyping is within Salesforce. My preference is HTML and CSS, and go into that later. But my background, I have a graphic design degree. I wanted to be a designer, and then I realized that I had a technical bent, so I taught myself development. So I got into front-end dev, and then I discovered what UX was, and I'm here. So in the last, I guess, 4 years, I've developed my UX. My UX foundation, I guess, I really built that up, and here I am, working for CodeScience.
So my name is my name is Alfonso Gómez-Arzola. I'm a designer and front-end developer based here in Chattanooga for the past 4 or 5 years. My background is in print design. Not that I ever went to school for it, but in the past few years I've been focusing more and more on web development, especially web apps more recently. Prototyping I usually use for communicating workflows for users when they have like a lengthy process to go on. They have to create a document, send it to 5 people, and then perform several actions on it. I like to prototype that out, whether it be in something really dumb like InVision or using HTML and CSS to kind of lay that out and communicate to the team what that should look like in terms of the experience. That and for very small, specific interactions. So rather than an entire application layout, what does a specific thing do and how does it behave in its own context without all the other distractions?
Cool. Thanks guys. Can you folks in the back hear us? Because we're trying to be, can you nod or shake your head? Okay, I see nodding. Awesome. Okay, so we'll try to be loud. Thank you guys for the introductions. Alfonso, you started to talk about how you use prototypes. So So that was my next question. So I was thinking maybe we could start with you again and come back this way.
Okay.
So could you add to that? Like, I guess the question is, what is a prototype? And when is it appropriate to use a prototype? And you started to talk about that a little bit. So I was wondering if you had anything to add, and then maybe we can come back this way. Take about 1 minute each.
Okay. I view a prototype as anything that a person can interact with. So whether it animates or not, and whether it is static images that are somehow hyperlinked artificially, or if it's an HTML and CSS prototype, anything that you can interact with and have it respond in some manner that will set expectations of behavior, that to me is a prototype. They can be very, very fleshed out, or they can be super dumb and rudimentary. But that's to me.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So, like I said earlier, I focus on HTML and CSS prototyping. On occasion, it is appropriate to use more like mockups, screenshots of certain flows. I have gone into the browser and used Chrome's inspect tool and modified code that way, and taken screenshots and piece a prototype together. And it's appropriate, especially when meeting up with a client and saying, here's a proposed flow, here's what we can do the most optimal flow through this. So it's not always necessarily HTML, CSS, reusable code necessarily. That's my preference, whenever possible. Sometimes it's just quicker to just edit in the browser and take snapshots. But as long as it communicates the intended flow, the intended interaction, and you can talk with the client through, a lot of times, in my experience, what will happen is they become a part of that conversation, they become a part of that collaboration, and they typically enjoy that. And a lot of times you reveal things that weren't addressed prior, certain interactions, what is this, or what are different conditions on the flow. So to me, that's a prototype. Anything that facilitates that conversation. My preference, like I said, is HTML, CSS, because it is usable.
Right. So a couple weeks ago, there was a talk here by Jonathan Patel, and I think he provided a good segue into this discussion. In his presentation, he talked about failure, and he said failure is feedback for the learning process, and that's essentially how I think, how I see prototyping. At its core, regardless of how it's made, if it's high fidelity, low fidelity, somewhere in between, prototypes are just a way to capture intent of a design by simulating multiple states. So the goal of prototypes is really just to help you fail faster and learn before you invest a lot more resources. So traditionally, prototypes are testing components, functionality, or business models with actual customers or potential customers. And those are all pretty common uses of prototypes. But recently, I found that I've been really liking it for internal communication. I think it really helps improve a shared understanding with projects, especially within developers and designers, especially if you're just kind of pairing designers and developers there. So while I'm working on a various feature of a project, I'll often stitch together multiple mockups. It's like a clickable prototype, and then kind of send that around and either test the interaction on myself. Sometimes I hate it afterwards and I throw it away. I gather feedback internally with the team, or you can use it as documentation for implementation with other developers in combination with synthetic mockups. And I found that that works extremely well, especially for distributed teams. I usually work remotely, so it works quite well for myself. It also works particularly well for selling an idea. So if you have, sometimes you have an idea, a basic sketch, sometimes it'll get run away pretty quickly or it gets prioritized very low. But if you present a prototype that's pretty well thought through and so you can actually click and feel around on it, it can really inspire clients and developers to kind of be excited about it and want to build it out pretty quickly.
Buy-in.
Yeah, the buy-in. So I think it helps really internally, but obviously in addition to testing actual customers outside.
Thank you, guys. So the next question is, think of one prototyping project you worked on that was a success. and what made it so successful. So let's take about 2 minutes each, and again, I'll repeat the question. Think of one prototyping project you worked on that was a success. What made it so successful? Let's start with Jordan and go that way.
Yeah. Okay, so about 6 years ago, I was living in Seattle, and I was working in a venture-backed startup that was failing very hard. So the VC basically stepped in and said, okay, we're going to stop this unless you can come up with something better very fast. So at this point, everyone was pretty much laid off or left the company. So the CEO, marketing person, junior front-end developer, and myself. So we had to come up with a new business or find another job. So it's a pretty unique situation. I stuck around and we ended up convincing the VC to kind of test out a new business idea with a prototype. Our idea was like a Groupon self-service, so small business owners like restaurants, yoga studios, who set up their own Groupon-like deal, and we take a much smaller cut than Groupon, and we wouldn't need tons of salespeople to actually sustain it. So it's a pretty decent idea. Actually, keep in mind that this is around the time Groupon was barely getting off the ground, so they had already pissed off a lot of their business owners there. So it's a pretty decent idea, but we didn't have the proper dev on staff, so we pretty much had to bake the entire thing. So I pieced together a heavily styled and branded like form that looked pretty legit, and like business owners would come in and fill out their data. That data would be submitted to a Google spreadsheet and would be PayPal using, or would be payment using PayPal. We then took that spreadsheet data and hosted onto like a Tumblr page where customers could then purchase that deal. And then any earnings for the business owner would be sent via paper check, snail mail. So it's really hacked together. And looking back, I'm not sure why we used Tumblr, but for some reason it made sense at the time. But you can imagine the prototype was really quickly built. And within a week or two, after getting feedback from business owners, we came to the quick understanding that these owners just didn't have the time or motivation to sit down and input their deals. Even though a lot of them during the research phase said, oh, we'd love to have a self-service Groupon. So in reality, they just didn't see the value for the amount of time that they put in, they would have to put in. So after learning from this prototype, we ended up doing small pivots to a white label platform for existing publishers. So instead of going directly to the business owner, we provide that software. And that ended up being a really good move. We ended up, within the course of a year, we scaled to over 100 employees through hires and acquisitions, and made a lot of money by publishing software for huge publishing platforms like NBC, Fox, Business Insider, the big ones. So the big takeaway here is learn, fail fast. And just imagine if we spent 6 months building a self-service platform, where would we be after that? So it's a good lesson there.
I don't know that I can top that. That's a pretty good success story. So I guess for my answer, I'll just stick to more tangible stuff. Not that I haven't seen some successes, but so one of my earlier prototyping projects actually involved pencil, eraser, and index cards. It's not a real in-depth story, but it's really just about methods. I prefer HTML, CSS, and all the same. But the really cool thing about the index cards, it was for mobile, so it was fairly similar in size already. And there was a lot of corporate hierarchy that had to get buy-in on this mobile app. And it involved financial flows. And so there was a lot of compliance around it and what you could not do on mobile. So as I learned like the different pieces of that, and I didn't know how to build mobile at that time. I actually wasn't into using Bootstrap or the framework at that time. So to figure out exactly what I was trying to convey was not impossible, but that was a constraint for me in my skill set. So like I said, I took to pencil and the paper, and I was able to make my own little set of templates and sketch through every view, so I could think in views and think from a user perspective, what would this person need to go through this app? And then along that process, it raised questions on, for the developers and for the business owners, decision points, things that they had to decide on. So So that was a really good vetting tool, and it was very low cost, which was awesome. I guess outside of that, that's kind of a nostalgic example, but outside of that would be just HTML, CSS, for a particular product that had an iPad app. We were able to code that out, not being hooked up to the database, not having any major interaction from a data perspective or functionality perspective. Maybe using some jQuery to and some of those behaviors. But we were able to see every view on that iPad app. But then there was also a desktop version for a different type of user. So we went through the same process, HTML, CSS, just coding out based on wireframes and some design models that we had. So it was just really cool to be able to see that and click through, hyperlink to the next HTML file. That's basically, it's a very simple, dummied up prototype. That was probably one of my favorite prototyping situations outside of the sketching. Just to be able to sit down with the business and say, here's what it's going to look like, and once you sign off on this, and everybody agrees that it feels right, it's the right flow, then we'll have these guys hook it up, and we're almost there to release. So that was a really good prototyping. It didn't say the company necessarily.
My example is I was referred to a company last year that they felt like they needed a new intranet. They had their existing intranet for about 8 or 9 years, and it was a complete mess. So they came to me pretty much asking me how much a new intranet cost us. We are asking our old provider to also quote on this, but we want to get some outside people, other people to do it. And after interviewing the client and hearing where the pain points were, they were all over the place. And so it was clear that what they needed really at that time was to first figure out the scope of the problem, because it was all over the place. They didn't have a clear definition of it. There was no way I could really get them a quote. The other company, they got them a quote, and it was basically, we'll upgrade you to our latest version of our CMS, which is a CMS and not an internet-oriented thing, but it's their product, so they push it. And the client thankfully decided to hire me as a consultant during a discovery process. During that process, we met with not heads of departments, but people who are using the internet every single day, who hate it every single day and hate their lives and their jobs because of it. and so that led to a lot of wireframing, but also several prototypes to kind of discover which interactions or which flows were more natural for lengthy processes that they have to go through, like when somebody needs to requisition a service or a product from another department, they need to make a purchase, so they need to get software installed on some machine, and there's like a gazillion different options and things that they need to fill out. And there's also file management, so I kind of showed them what updating a document on an intranet should look like, as opposed to what it was at the moment, which was you just updated a new document. Now, instead of 15, there are 16 versions of this document, and they're all over the place. And we can't update every link for you. You're going to have to go and find them. I kind of showed them what it could look like if you had a proper versioning system in there where you can update a document and all links to that document get updated. Just showing them how that could work, even on a very rudimentary prototype, because there wasn't much of a budget. It's really not, it's kind of like seeing children learn things. And they're like, what? You do that? And so I think part of the success with that was getting the client to understand that these things can be done more fluidly, more intuitively, more efficiently. And the other part is that eventually they found out that their new head of IT wanted to take over that project. This was being run by 2 communications employees, by the way. It was a 2-person communication department, and they were in charge of the entirety of the intranet for a company that is in the tens of thousands of employees. So they were very happy to have the IT director decide, you know what, we want to take it over. But for the time being, what we decided was we would still go to the old company, get them to update and blah, 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 and this and that, but also get them to implement certain modules and certain conventions that we felt were the best to kind of address the biggest pain points. And without those wireframes and prototypes, it would have been very difficult to communicate that to them. And that company was actually very, very open to that, because rather than us speaking in abstract terms, we were able to show them this is exactly what we would like to see to make our employees' lives more easy, more easy, yes, easier. And they responded very well to that. And finally built it out about a month ago. So that was good.
Very cool. Okay, so we're on to our last question. Let's take about 1 minute each, and then we'll wrap up the last question and open it up for audience Q&A. So the last question is, what is one significant challenge that you face with prototyping? What is one significant challenge that you face with prototyping?
This way?
Yeah, sorry, someone at you.
Yeah. So for me, it's not letting the designer get in the way and try to design things and make them look nice and make them line up perfectly and all of that, which is kind of low-hanging fruit, I guess, in the context of this discussion. But it's a big thing that I struggle with, wanting to get things to look a certain way, which can actually work against the prototype, because once you put that in front of stakeholders and developers and clients, they'll focus on that. They'll nitpick that rather than on what they're really trying to do with the prototype, which is show them a flow, a behavior, an interaction, whatever it is. So that's a big challenge for me. And another is the rare client that can get past the drab look of a prototype. So that when you do keep it very, very drab and very straightforward, not at all visual, just about how things are supposed to function and plug into one another, the occasional client that can't get past that, which doesn't happen to me as often anymore. I'm working more with startup people that kind of understand that, but sometimes I will run into a client that doesn't quite get that. That's not. I'm not proposing that this is going to be your site and we're going to launch it next week. It's purely for how to see how things move from one stage to another.
I chuckle because I know exactly what you're talking about. I have that exact experience. For me, I think what I've actually learned in the last year, prototyping too soon, and you would think in the way we're talking about prototyping, it's like, heck yeah, let's prototype. Yes, but you want to have a good list of requirements. You want to have that discovery with your client. And even some discoveries, with some clients, they need something more visual sooner to talk through what they're even trying to build. Because a lot of times they think they know what they want, and then sometimes they're like, well, so-and-so does it like that, and so-and-so does it like that. You kind of want that, but sort of a blend. That's not good enough. So prototyping, iterating through prototypes is awesome. It saves, before developers, back-end developers get their hands on something and start plugging things in. It's good to iterate and vet concepts, vet ideas and solutions to the problems that you're solving for. If you don't have good requirements, don't let a client ride, hey, I need something visual so we can discuss this. Because what I have seen in the last year, we're going to the topic, is that they take that as the final design, and just the speed at which that kind of thing happens. And there's other factors that play into that situation, but the speed at which you're going to try to get to an MVP, it's sometimes things do get kind of off the rail. So by the time it's time to hand off to a developer to actually build something and pick it up, you have this thing that's sort of still a prototype, but the client wants that to be the end design, and it's just like, sure about that. And then along that process, they're like, oh yeah, we also want, so there's also the scope of the situation. So in prototyping, you really want to have your discovery process kind of nailed down, and have the right conversations, surface the right questions. And prototype, it's an evolving process. You want to iterate through things and vet. And communicate that to your client very clearly and set expectations early on that. So I guess that answers your question, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so I agree that managing expectations is definitely one of the hardest parts of prototyping, especially prior to kind of setting up the stage prior to them actually using the prototype, because you might get some false positives when you're actually doing that. But also, I find that it's not easy to prototype interactions that are a little bit more complex than single click. So often prototyping tools are just you click, you move the layer or something. That's pretty much it. If you're trying to do something more complex like drag and drop or swiping interaction, that can get pretty tricky pretty fast, along with transitions and animations. There are some tools that allow you to do that a little bit easier, but it's a little bit more time consuming and you just can't pump out the prototype as fast as you want to, so there's definitely a downside to that. But one thing to keep in mind when kind of building prototypes is to understand your audience and intent. If your audience is a designer, or audience of your prototype is a designer or someone else on your team, you may not need to simulate that proper drag and drop. You may just put an annotation and say, oh, that's a drag and drop, and that's enough. But if you're taking that prototype to a trade show or to some actual customer, then you'll want something with a little bit more higher fidelity and something that feels a little bit more closer to the actual product. So really, it really depends on your audience and intent of your design.
Thank you, folks. So now we can open it up to audience Q&A. Does anybody have a question for our panelists? Yes.
So, question about the process and tools. You say there are various things you can use to kind of wireframe or mock up anything from index cards to sitting down and like writing left bracket, TR, right bracket, right, which takes forever and you can't do that in front of the client. So what sort of tools would you use, just as like a quick survey of a sample size of 3, to like, if you wanted to do like a visual design in front of the client and actually be able to adjust things on the fly?
So if I understand your question correctly, it's what tools would you use if you wanted to prototype in front of a client?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, I mean, I'll just jump in. I mean, one of the easiest things that I've had working with internal business users and on-site for the client is taking, this is really kind of cheap, but taking a poster board, laminating it, and taking a set of marker pins, marker board pins. So you can like iterate through ideas really fast. If you don't have that, obviously paper and pen. I mean, napkin sketches, or that. I mean, that even works. But I mean, the marker board is very portable in that sense. And erasable.
Just go straight to animal in that situation.
Yeah, I think it really helps with collaboration because it's messy and you're not afraid of messing anything up. So you can just sketch something out. And I often like to sketch while I'm in the meeting if they're talking about it. Like I'll draw it out just so that we're all on common ground. And then take it there and digitize it and then turn it into something that's a little bit more beautiful.
To go off later.
Yeah.
Yeah, everybody can grab a marker, right?
Yeah.
So when we're collaborating with them, they're going to want to also put their part of it in there, communicate in that manner, which is good for you.
Yeah.
Especially if you're talking about flow, it's a lot easier to just marker it out. If you're talking about like design details, I think it's a little bit tricky.
It's also fun.
But somebody hovering over you while you're trying to.
It's
the worst.
Yeah.
That's when you make the most mistakes. That's when you forget all your hotkeys. That's when you forget where everything is and how to even type. I forget how to type.
But to the coding perspective though, I mean, you can speed up a lot of that with workflow. At CodeScience, we have some really awesome developers who have like come up with Yeoman generators that help us spin up prototypes faster, and they go beyond that. Like they're pretty badass. But just using chaining workflow pieces together, Yeoman, Bower, and these are things that I'm not a good group on, but I know that they exist. And I know how to sort of use them. So if you can investigate those workflow pieces and learn a little bit about them and figure out your own workflow and piece them together to make the most efficient flow for yourself. Coding prototypes doesn't have to be as like,
Yeah, or slow. That's true, and you should definitely look into creating your own boilerplates and your own generators. It's very easy with Yeoman, or I prefer Slush because I prefer Dolphin in general. And with Slush, you can create any kind of generator you want based off of a variety of files you want. You can even have it come up with ask you questions while you're generating. So if you know this client wants to talk about forms, when you include a little form module in there, that already pops your kind of boilerplate form elements in there, and then at that point you're not writing code, you're just kind of copying and pasting real quick so that he or she can see what you want them to see on the browser. So.
And to that point, like if you've ever gone to Bootstrap's website and gone through their components list, that's basically a style guide. And that's a pattern that a lot of UX designers and front-end developers utilize. They for each project they make their own style guide, where they have the little snippets of code that make that particular component, whether it's Bootstrap app or whatever. I haven't gotten into that myself in my own workflow as much, but that's an area that I'm ahead with my prototyping. But I think it's very powerful, very useful. So.
Thank you. I have a question. You said that you're talking about the marker board. Is that what it was called? A little while ago, something you can write on. Is that like, you mean like whiteboard on the wall? Or
No, like buy the 3-pack of poster boards.
Okay.
Go to Staples, have them laminated. And there may be a product out there now, but I just kind of
Okay. So it's, and then you just get like I guess whiteboard markers and
extra markers.
Okay. That's
And
cool.
it rolled up and I can pin it and I have the markers in my laptop bag and it's ready to roll.
That's awesome. Cool.
So, like, I guess I have a problem personally where, like, if I spend too long on like a high fidelity comp or like a high fidelity, design or prototype, I get like emotionally attached in some ways to certain things. Like, it's really hard to like throw away big parts of that workflow because like excess time is going into it. I'm wondering, but it seems like you all have experienced this with your long heads. So that was my first question: was you guys experience this? We learn to turn that off. And then two, what are tricks to avoid that? And like, maybe speed up that workflow. Or, like, how do you not do that?
So just going back to the marker board solution, it's the art of letting go.
And do try to force yourself to spend less time. Right? If for you acknowledge that spending a lot of time means I'm going to put a lot of love into it, then screw the love and be all business. Seriously, you make it drab and ugly. You know, I was sharing something with some students in UTC last year, and what I was sharing, it was just wireframes, but the wireframes had kind of hand-drawn style lines and Comic Sans. and they were scoffing at that. These are design students. And I'm like, that is the point. It's but ugly, and I don't care about it. I care about the solution. Is the solution appropriate? And maybe the client thinks it's not. Well, fine. Maybe it's not because they know their users better than I do. Whatever. I'm not emotionally invested. But it is also a lot. Sorry. It is also, I totally hear you. It took me many years as a print designer. Because in print, you spend a lot of time on things that are all going to end up in the trash or some secret portfolio of yours. And it really just takes a lot of working with yourself to be a little more divorced and realize that once you call it done, even if it's worked out, it's done, it's done. Now it belongs to the world, it's not belongs to you. And try to work with yourself to let it go.
Yeah, I think it just goes back to the failing faster. And I think it takes a lot of time to learn that and to like have that discipline to be like, okay, I think we can test this a little bit of it. I think you just kind of learn that along the way, and then you just kind of you don't put yourself in a position where you build a lot of things before you test it. Or you kind of go into like a component-driven design where you're doing more of like a style, lifestyle guide type of thing, and you're only working on the different components, and you're kind of piecing together a puzzle. And that way you're only throwing away parts of it
Yeah.
Another.
Yeah, just well, that's part of it's like you get emotionally attached to like when you build. I think there's a second part, which is maybe not even like being able to throw it away, but like being able to mentally throw it away, like have it not affect the next thing, and you start to. But that didn't work. So how do I then like tweak that or build a new thing? And how do you like let that inform you without being kind of attached to that decision? Now, like letting it cause your mental palette as well.
So one thing that I noticed when I prototype, I use code, I kind of get stuck in the CSS sometimes because I'm trying to achieve a behavior, but it should also look this certain way. Try to always start very without style. You know, have your structure, your semantics, and your structuring and your code. Maybe that's really simple advice. You're awesome at coding.
You get a lot of like second pair of eyes during that process, and you get other people's opinion on what you're building as you're building it before you get very attached to it. So I was going to suggest maybe that would help you. Sure. But if you're already doing it, it's still kind of getting.
So the direction I was headed was like creating with an outline view in mind first before investing in CSS. That's what I have at the course. Cool.
Nice. I'm glad, Alfonso, I'm glad you found a use for Comic Sans.
Things that need to look butt up.
Awesome. Next, I think there's another question up front.
Yeah, I was just gonna. I like the idea of the analog, with markers and drawing things manually, but that requires you to be in the same room with the person that you're doing that for. So if you're talking with someone who's on the West Coast, for you, Rina, I know you do that a lot. What about online collaboration tools for prototyping? What do you have?
Lucid chart for drawing, for process drawing. Or even something as simple as drawing. You can do component specific things to get a certain idea. And you can't Photoshop it. You can't go to that level, which is great. But just getting basic ideas and like wireframe stuff and being able to make tools like that, I think, help me in the process. I guess that's probably the best because you can invite people to share that document and they can comment and they can see why things happening. So as you're meeting and discussing stuff, you can add notes and everything see what's going on.
Lucid chart.
Lucid chart.
You can also invest in like, I actually have an answer. You can actually invest in like a really cheap document viewer kind. Yeah, you can. There's a brand name. I'm sure there's a couple of them, but there's a brand name that it's like a go-to. Does anybody know what it is? I'm like, I can't.
There's actually, like, just recently in the last year, Epson of all people, they have a document camera, but they also have an interactive whiteboard projector that serves as a server for a web app. And so you can be here, like, on a whiteboard, marking up, but everybody can see it on their iPad or on their phone or on their computers. And if they're on their iPad, they can, like, mark up as well and draw things. It's really a neat system, and you don't see it anywhere, but I follow it.
Is it like a high cost? It sounds like something that would be high cost.
It's like $3,000. So if you're buying a projector, but if you're buying a projector for your conference room, it's totally worth that value.
Yeah.
It's really funny that you can get like a Game Boy Touch, and like there's a little thing you can play a game where you can like each draw things and send them to each other. There's stuff like that, Google Drawings or whatever. You just take a mouse.
The document camera.
Yeah.
There are also online whiteboard applications that are like a collaboration. If you both have random tablets or something, it makes it pretty easy to just collaborate through that. Also, if I'm just sketching, sometimes I'll just take a photo of the sketch.
Yeah. And the document viewer, like that I'm thinking of, I can't remember the name of it, but it's less than $100, and you can just and you can basically, if you sketch something, you put it for the document camera, and you're like Skyping with somebody, you share your screen, and they can see your sketch right away. I mean, it's a little bit nicer than like trying to hold up a sketch to like your laptop's webcam, and you're like, right.
And to that point, actually, we use Google Hangouts heavily where I'm at, and which is awesome. But you can actually in Hangouts select that document as your source. So I can log in on this computer. I've actually used my phone and rubber banded it to an old lamp. Seriously, that does work. Yeah, have yourself in there twice, but choose the camera and show live drawing. It's the actually happening.
We have time for one more question.
So you guys, it sounds like you all do client work, and prototyping, I mean, there is a cost involved with prototyping. Have you run into much resistance from your clients, and if so, how have you gotten over that?
So the question is, like, how do you deal with client resistance to prototypes?
I think
Because of cost, sorry, because of cost specifically.
Because they don't want to spend the time.
well, in my experience, it's because they're not familiar with like UX. We call that part of the process. We group that with UX. But if they're not familiar with UX and what that is, like between the thinking and iterating behind concepts and the actual UI piece of that, the UI part, then you have to convince them. But I think they see the value. Once you spin out that first prototype and you have that first meeting and say, hey, here's what we were thinking, and they can say, yes, no, that's not quite right, and maybe even do live changes in that session, they get user buy-in. So in my experience.
I don't have a lot of that. I just build that into my process. That's my process, and that's what we go through. Period. I haven't had a client say, "Well, can we just skip the prototyping process?" I don't know. Maybe they were enlightened enough to understand they need a few drafts before you get to it. Maybe they just see it as drafts.
Yeah. I'm the same, but it just kind of built into the process, and you just kind of set those expectations for the clients. And as long as there's enough trust on both sides, then it's usually not a big deal.
We might have time for one more question. Any other questions? We've answered all your questions about prototyping. That is awesome. Yeah, so go for the prototype. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, guys, for joining us.
I counted about 70 people here, which is definitely a record, which is awesome. I also counted about 19